Well, another very warm welcome back to your number one and favourite vintage motocross channel here on YouTube, Classic Dirt Bike TV. And once again, thanks to each and every one of you for your continuing support with regards subscribing and of course some of the many mainly positive comments that you're leaving on my video content. But I do hope you continue to enjoy more of these old vintage racers in the weeks and months to come. Okay, coming up next on my channel, we're going to delve back into the Rob Hughes classic bike collection. Now, I did make this visit to Rob's premises in the summer of 2021 and spent a couple of days filming and taking pictures of some of the fantastic bikes that Rob has in his collection. And right now we're going to take a look at another one of Rob's famous CCM bikes, and this particular model is a beautifully restored model from 1980. So without any further delay, let's just jump straight into the video. Now this beautifully restored 1980 model CCM is another classic that's been taken from the fantastic Rob Hughes vintage CCM collection. And Rob is lucky to have some of the nicest and rarest Alec Middleton bikes in the UK and possibly even in Europe and beyond. And for me personally, I think this featured bike is certainly one of the nicest I've ever seen. And in this particular shot, here we have Rob on the right there with his son Joel, who's also a top motocross racer in his own right. And we'll also be taking a look at this particular CCM, which was the very last of the CCM racers. So we'll be taking a walk around this bike in another video here soon on my channel. Now, by the time 1980 came around, Alec Middleton had no fewer than 6 different models of CCM in his factory, and for that year you could choose between a 500, a 545 or a slightly larger 580, or you could even opt for the enormous 620 model. And of course, at the lower end of the scale you could also buy a 250 or a 125 CCM that were powered by an Italian Hyro 2-stroke motor. But for 1980, CCM certainly had their best range ever for selling bikes, although it's said that they were selling more CCM parts at that time than actual bikes. And it was around that 1980 period that Alec Middleton decided to then sell his machines directly to the public straight from the factory rather than through an authorised dealership, just to try and save a bit of money, because by the early 1980s competition was very fierce for motocrossers and Alan had to cut his cloth accordingly to try and compete with the influx of the cheaper Japanese motorcycles. Now, our featured bike is a 1980 500, and fans of these CCMs do say that these 1980 bikes with the gold fuel tank were certainly among some of the nicest machines that Alec Middleton ever created. Now, the story goes of our bike here is that this machine was originally ridden by a rider called Johnny Williams, who, it's said, bought the bike brand new from the Bristol Dirt Bike Show in 1980, and he later then sold it to another rider called Vince Hale, who raced it in the popular 4-stroke motocross championship in the UK in 1980. And for a British-made motocrosser in that year, these CCMs were hugely popular and of course very quick. Now, as you're no doubt aware, these single-cylinder 4-stroke CCMs were powered by a revamped BSA B50 engine, and this particular motor here is a 4-valve model with the 3-speed Quaife gearbox, although later Alan Clues would then add a fourth gear to these motors, as the watch riders said that they needed an extra gear for some of the long straights that they were encountering when racing at the big Grand Prix events, and so Alan had to try and then fit an extra cog into these crankcases to make use of the huge torque that these big four-banger motors were putting out. Now, once again, CCM, of course, were famous for coming up with the idea of using these casings on the motor to mount the footrests, on which at the time many skeptics of the idea said that it was a very strange place to mount them, as they said it would just add stress to the engine casings, although the actual reality of the situation was somewhat different, because CCM never had a single case of casing failure using this type of configuration, and more often than not it was either the foot peg itself that would either break or bend, and not the mounting on the casing. Although when you consider when Alan Clues bought out the remains of the old BSA competition department in the early 1970s, they wouldn't give Alan any access to any of the BSA Works engines, and so Alan just then took the stock BSA 500 motor and then tuned it for more power, and when they were all set up right and working as they should, these B50 engines were more than a match for any of the Japanese four-strokers that were on the market at the time. Now again, as I remember, I think these 500 motors were fitted with a big Amal carburetor back in 1980, and there was quite a bit of gas that would flow through these units, because it's certainly no secret that these big CCMs did like a drink when they were working hard on the racetrack. Now, in the engine's exhaust department, there wasn't much in the way of a silencer to try and keep this baby quiet. These were real racing motors with big bore straight through exhaust pipes, and although this bike here still had a tailpipe fitted, it did very little to dampen down that CCM roar when that huge 500 motor got fired up. And there's certainly no sweeter sound than a big CCM going down the track at full pelt. Now, for these 1980 bikes, Alan Clues had used a certain amount of magnesium on this 1980 model, and these top and bottom triple clamps or fork yokes were cast in that weight-saving magnesium metal to just try and keep the overall weight of the bike to a decent level. But these CCMs were still very comparable in weight to similar bikes in their class. Now, in the past, CCM did use front suspension systems from other outside suppliers, although on this 1980 bike, CCM were now designing and building their own forks for their race bikes, and these once more were fitted with these magnesium casings, which again of course kept the overall weight of the bike down. But these were decent suspension systems, and by 1980 standards they worked extremely well. Now, once more, the bike's front and rear brake hubs were cast in magnesium for shedding more precious grams from the all-up weight of the bike, and in terms of their stopping power, they were probably adequate at best, as of course all of these old drum brake systems were to a certain extent. But as I've said in other videos of old vintage dirt bikes, you have to accept that this was of course a time that drum brakes were the technology of their day, but a far cry from the powerful hydraulic stopping power that we have on modern motocrossers today. Now again, as I mentioned previously, the rear hub is also cast in magnesium, and these magnesium parts on these CCMs are not that easy to come by these days, and when you can pick up an old CCM with its magnesium fixings all still in place, it's certainly a rare find indeed, and that's another reason that when you order one of the remanufactured replica CCM models, that you often find them being built with either CZ or even micro hubs, because these magnesium parts for these cruise bikes are so rare to find. And now I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that more or less all of these CCMs housed the motor's engine oil in this down tube of the chassis, where the oil exited at this little junction at the bottom, and it was then pumped around the motor and then back into the frame. Now the frame's oil filler was through this little screw plug that's just behind the top triple clamp, and you can also see the oil return pipe that's sitting there just beside it. Now, back in 1980, many of the Works CCM bikes were at that time fitted with white power rear shocks, and as you can see here, Rob's tried to keep this bike period correct by also fitting these white power piggyback units on this machine. Now again, these white power suspension systems were very good quality and are still a popular choice for many motocross racers even in this modern day, but as you're aware, WP or White Power, as you know, was founded by Wim Peters way back in 1977, and they're still regarded as one of the world's top motorcycle suspension suppliers. And of course, one of the more outstanding features on this Rob Hughes CCM bike is this gold coloured alloy fuel tank, which was quite an easy way to identify a CCM if you were watching one blasting around the racetrack in that year. Probably at that time it would have been ridden to within an inch of its life by the great Bob Wright, or maybe even John Banks. And Rob's even added the authentic Castrol sticker on the top of the tank, who of course were one of the major sponsors to CCM back in 1980. Although I have to say that this featured bike is more or less an original machine from 1980, and although it's been fully restored, it still has all of the proper CCM parts that would have been fitted to it in that year, and that includes this very comfortable looking seat, which as I remember was among one of the most comfortable places to lay your backside down on between the big jumps and the bumps. Now again, Rob's CCM has all the correct controls fitted from 1980 with this nice gasser throttle and a set of Magura levers. Now these CCM lever covers are again from that very same year, and even the Scott handlebar grips are much the same as you would have found on one of these bikes in 1980. Now once more, the bike's handlebars and even that extremely rare CCM bar pad that goes across the top of the handlebars are again the real deal, and these kind of parts you just don't find for these bikes nowadays. And if you were lucky enough to come across any such gems as these, then you are certainly a very lucky person indeed. Now I think I'm right in saying here that all of the restoration work on this lovely machine was done by Rob's chief mechanic and all-round bike building genius, Alec Middleton. Now, Alec is credited for performing many of the restorations in Rob's collection of classic dirt bikes, and when Alec puts an old racer together, his workmanship is certainly without question, as you can already gather here in this 1980 500. But this is just one of the many Clues competition machines that Rob has in his Aladdin's Cave of rare Alan Clues race bikes, and we've already featured a few examples here on my channel in the past. But for me, personally speaking, Alan Clues never really got the recognition that he deserved while he was designing, building, marketing and racing these four-stroke British-made race bikes, because I still think that these CCMs are without doubt one of the best-looking British-made four-stroke motocrossers ever. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that brief walk around another one of Rob Hughes' fantastic CCM bikes, and this of course is just one of the many CCMs that Rob has in his collection, and I think he has one of the best collections of CCM bikes in the UK and possibly even in Europe, and we'll be taking a look at many more examples of these Alan Clues bikes from Rob's collection in the coming weeks and months here on my channel. Okay, coming up next, we're going to take a look at this quite nice looking YZ250 Evolution Yamaha bike. Now, this is a machine that belongs to Andrew Rudkin, and we'll be taking a look at Andrew's lovely YZ in the next video here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. So until then, of course, the usual, everybody continue to be safe and well out there, and look out and watch what you're doing when you're riding these old vintage classics. But we'll all get back together again sometime soon to talk about more vintage race bikes right here on your favourite and #1 Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.